Welcome to 5% Radio, where it's all about learning like no one else today so you can live like no one else tomorrow. Please be sure to share and subscribe. What's up, 5%ers, and welcome back to another episode of the 5% Radio podcast. Today is episode number 59, and I am incredibly excited to share a story with you guys. Now, this may be a 2, 3, or possibly 4-part episode, but I would highly encourage you to stick around for all parts of that, because when you hear who this story is actually about and you realize who I've been talking about, the facts that I've been sharing, the dream, struggle, victory of this individual, you're going to be blown away, because this is something that probably very few people know, although he did write an autobiography and it was absolutely phenomenal. I'm actually reading it for the second time, and that was what sparked me sharing this story. I've wanted to share the story for quite a while, but let's go ahead and dive in. So buckle up. It's going to be a 2, 3, or 4-part series, depending on how much detail I want to put in it. There's only so much that you can cut out without really giving life to what this guy did. So anyway, without further ado, I want to talk to you about a man who changed the world as we know it during his lifetime. This man's business actually is still cruising along many years after his death, amazingly still growing to the tune of generating total revenue of $25.49 billion in the year 2023 alone. And at the time of his death, he had an estimated net worth of $600 million, but he actually passed away in 1984. So if you factor in inflation and transfer that into today's money, what that would be worth nowadays, he was actually worth around $1.7 billion. He was also named in Time 100 as one of the most important people of the century in the 1900s. So with no further ado, let's dive into this story. One last little disclaimer here, guys. I've read this autobiography twice now, and I don't know if this will be a 1, 2, 3, or 4-part series. There's so much that I wanted to include in this man's story just because of what he ended up doing with his life, and it was just so interesting to see all the different journeys and detours and paths and careers that he took. But I will be quoting his autobiography, in other words, quoting him directly a lot, and more than I've done in any other story so far, simply because of the fact that this was the first autobiography that I found that gave me this much detail on this individual. I wasn't having to search Google and YouTube and other podcasts and all kinds of stuff to piece this together. So I want to keep that together because I don't want to lose anything in translation, but I just want you guys to know I will be citing the source down in the podcast show notes, but I just want you to keep that in mind. So if it seems like, man, he sure is quoting this guy a lot, is he being lazy? No, it actually took me hours and hours and hours and hours and hours to put every single one of these parts together. But anyway, wanted to give that disclaimer out. Hope you enjoy this. Let's dive in. Raymond, or later known in his life as Ray, was born on October 5th, 1902 in Oak Park, Illinois, to Bohemian immigrants, Louis and Rose. His parents actually did not have much money, and by any means, they were not wealthy. They were actually pretty poor, and this contributed to, I believe, his insatiable, nonstop hunger, his drive to succeed throughout the entirety of his life. But as a young man, he struggled in school and was often bored with his studies, and some of his fondest childhood memories were playing baseball all the time in the alley behind their house as a kid, and probably one of the major reasons for this is that both he and his father were avid baseball fans, and this was also heavily influenced by the fact that his father was a member of the same lodge as Joe Tinker, who back in this time was one of the Chicago Cubs' great players, and because of the fact that the father and Joe Tinker were at the same lodge, they were actually personally acquainted. His mother, Rose, was a piano teacher, and naturally, she actually made him take lessons as a kid, which, although he took naturally to at the time, he was not particularly fond of. And we do, however, see that this paid off later in life, and this talent that was fostered by his mother did come in handy during another phase where he actually needed money, was in a tight spot, and was able to use that talent to kind of put some food on the table and pay the bills, but we'll get to that later. This man said in his autobiography, "I took to the piano naturally. My faculty at the keyboard pleased my mother, and I'm still thankful to her for those hours of disciplined practice. Although at the time, I often thought her demands were excessive, I became proficient enough to acquire a minor reputation in the neighborhood." So fast forwarding a little bit, right around the time or just before he got into high school, he landed his first job saying this: "I had spent the previous summer and lunch hours during the school year working in my uncle Harold Edmonds' Sweets drugstore soda fountain in Oak Park. That was where I learned that you could influence people with a smile and enthusiasm and sell them a sundae when what they'd come in for was a cup of coffee." Now, I want to take a pause here and say this. Notice something, that his preparatory experiences, the things that he did in the beginning that probably seemed like they didn't mean anything, as he got older and as he became successful, he looked back on those as stepping stones on the way to his future success. So although at the time it probably just seemed like a job, probably just seemed like nothing, just, whatever, hey, this is fun, I'm paying bills, I'm saving money, keep this in mind that everything you go through in your life, everything now is preparing you for something later. Okay, back to the story. While working for someone else, he was daydreaming all the time. They actually ended up, his mother and his family called him Danny Daydreamer, but he was looking for a way to go into business for himself, and his first business idea, and what he ended up doing, was a music store partnership with two of his other young, ambitious friends. And one of the reasons being that he wanted to get paid to play piano like some of the guys did in the big stores back then, like Sears and all the other different large, department stores. People would actually sit in the music section and they would play piano, and you would bring a piece to them and say, hey, I'm thinking about buying this. Can you play a few bars of this? And they would play the song for you. That was one of his dreams. Like, man, I really want to do that for a living, because again, he didn't love piano when he was younger, but he became talented. His mother fostered that. She made him practice over and over and over again. And now he grew to love music. And he said this: I saved just about every penny I earned and finally had enough in the bank to go into the music store business with two friends. We each invested $100 and rented a little hole-in-the-wall shop for $25 a month. We sold sheet music and novelty instruments such as ocarinas, harmonicas, and ukuleles. I was the piano man, and I did a lot of playing and singing, but not much selling. The sad truth is that we didn't do enough business to put in your eye. We had a month-to-month lease, and after a few months, we gave it up, sold our stock of goods to another music store, divided the money that was left 3 ways, and that was that. Fast forward not too much further in the future, Ray drops out of high school after his sophomore year, saying this about the experience: my sophomore year in high school passed like a funeral. I began to feel about school the way I had felt earlier about the Boy Scouts. And he talks about, basically, he was in the Boy Scouts, and he was really excited about it at first, but he just didn't feel like they were making progress, didn't feel like the challenge was there, didn't feel like it was really going to go anywhere, so he ended up quitting. And he recalled that the only thing he really enjoyed about school was debating, saying of the topic, here was an activity I could sink my teeth into. Figuratively, of course, but I would not have hesitated to bite a debate opponent if it would have advanced my argument. And right around this time, when he was dropping out of school, just finishing his sophomore year in high school, right around this time, the U.S. was entering a state of great turmoil. As the school year ended for Raymond that year, as he was dropping out of his 10th grade or sophomore year in high school, the U.S. was entering World War I, which actually at the time was known as, quote-unquote, the Great War, because why would anyone ever assume that such a terrible thing would ever happen again? There was never to be another like it. So it was called the Great War. So naturally, being a man of action, someone that wanted the challenge, someone who was driven and wanting adventure as a young man, as an older teenage boy, what does he do? He lies about his age to get into the Red Cross and serve any way he could, due to the fact that his parents would not actually let him fight in the war as a regular soldier. So he was not able to do that. So he ended up more or less fibbing about his age, joining the Red Cross. And his version of this was as follows. As school ended that spring, the United States entered World War I. I took a job selling coffee beans and novelties door to door. I was confident I could make my way in the world and saw no reason to return to school. Besides, the war effort was more important. Everyone was singing over there, and that is where I wanted to be. My parents objected strenuously, but I finally talked them into letting me join up as a Red Cross ambulance driver. I had to lie about my age, of course, but even my grandmother could accept that. During his time in the Red Cross Training Company, his squadron, his platoon was actually assembled, and they were in Connecticut for training, and there was another fellow who had lied about his age to get in as well. Raymond said this of that other fellow who lied about his age to get into the Red Cross, just like he did. He was regarded as a quote-unquote strange duck, because whenever we had time off and went out on the town to chase girls, he stayed up in camp drawing pictures. His name was Walt Disney. Now, let me pause. Think about how crazy this was. These two men literally changed the world. The time that they were around, they were some of the most influential, just earth-shattering, that they did so much to change a crazy amount of things back then that has also continued to change things and grow massive businesses to nowadays. And these two men ended up being in the exact same place at the exact same time. They met each other, and they ended up doing incredible things with their lives and producing billions and billions and billions of dollars of business, changing the world as we know it, changing multiple industries. And it's just crazy that they ended up in the exact same state, same station for training at the same age. Anyway, back to the story. Ray's time in the Red Cross didn't last long because while he was still 17 and before he had actually been shipped out, the armistice was signed, and this was just before he was about to get on a boat and get shipped out to France, so he went marching back home to Chicago wondering, what am I going to do next? His well-meaning parents talked him into trying school again, but in his own words, I lasted only one semester. Algebra had not improved in my absence. I wanted to be out selling and playing the piano for money, and that's what I did. He got a territory selling ribbon novelties and took to it like a duck takes to water. He had a sample room at the hotel that he was in, so wherever he was, he would set up a sample room, and he was staying in this hotel. He would have a sample room set up, and he would learn what each buyer's taste was and then cater to that specific taste. He said this of the sales job, quote, no self-respecting pitcher throws the same way to every batter, and no self-respecting salesman takes the same approach to every client. Now, let's take pause here again, and we see again that the desire to succeed drove him to learn his craft. It drove him to change. It drove him to get better. It drove him to study. It drove him to practice, just like he practiced piano, just like he practiced baseball. Everything that he did, he was realizing, man, this helped me along my journey. He didn't start as a natural. He didn't start as a phenomenal salesman. He didn't start as someone who was, quote-unquote, gifted. He learned how to get good at what he decided to do. This is something that everyone can do in their profession of choice, their career, whatever you do for a living. You have to learn how to get good. You're not born good or bad. You grow into the person that you're supposed to be. Back to the story. Around this point, he began playing music as side gigs for pay, using the talent that his mother encouraged and fostered in him as a young boy. And in 1919, anyone making $25 or $30 a week was doing well. But to quote Raymond, it wasn't long before on good weeks and with a lot of musical gigs, I was making more money than my father. Think about this. He's still super young, probably not even 20 at this time based on the timeline, and he's making more money than his dad already because he's just willing to work that much. The guy's just that driven that he was willing to do whatever it took, and he's making great money. It's not even 1920 yet. He's still a young teenager, not even 20 years old. He's making more money than his dad. That's ridiculous. His interest in music continued to flourish, and he ended up leaving his job selling ribbon novelties and joining a band. The year was 1919, and he tells stories of playing on a steamboat as they went upstream and downstream, and there would be a guy with a megaphone, not like you picture today, but just with a, basically like a cardboard or wooden megaphone, and they would be yelling where they were going to be playing that night. There was a dime a dance event, and they were yelling, we're going to be playing here at this time for this long at Paw Paw Lake, Michigan, and among the regular crowd at these events were two sisters, one named Ethel, who, in fact, later became a very serious girlfriend of Raymond's. In his next profession, and by the way, if you've listened to my story in this podcast, it's way back in some of the episodes, I can really relate with the fact that he had this many jobs because this is something that I went through as well. But anyway, his next profession was, after playing in a band for a while, he moved on to something else, writing about this experience, saying, my next job was in Chicago's financial district as a board marketer on the New York Curb, as the market that became the American Stock Exchange used to be called. My employer was a firm named Worcester Thomas. And when he was writing about this, he talked about one of the reasons that he took that job is because it had a nice professional ring to it. I work for Worcester Thomas, and that was actually something that influenced him taking this job. But that didn't last super long because his parents decided to up and move, and although he did not want to go at the time, he ended up going with them. He was still young, he wasn't stable, didn't have anything really settled in for a life, so he moved with his parents. And he moved to New York, and he took a job at the New York branch of the exact same firm, Worcester Thomas, only to go into work one day not long after starting this new job at the new branch in New York to find the place boarded up. They had gone bankrupt, which means Raymond lost out on a week's pay plus vacation time. I want to take another side note here and say this: 99% of companies do not care about people as individuals. It wasn't different then. It's not different now. I just heard of a guy that worked for a company for 22 years strictly because of how good their pension was. The company got purchased, the pension was dissolved, and they gave one-time payments, not based on seniority, not based on hours worked, not based on years in, not based on any of that stuff. They gave one-time payouts of the person's pension based on their age. He had been there 22 years, got a lump sum of less than $70,000. Someone who had been there for 5 years who happened to be older than him numerically, as in he was, let's say, 51, they were 53, got $180,000, even though they hadn't had the same time in. Companies are not out for your best interest 99% of the time. Your boss may be great. He may care personally. Heck, a few coworkers may love you. They may do anything they can for you. They may be, we'll give you the shirt off our back, but it comes down to money in versus money out. And if it comes to between you staying or your boss staying, guess who's going? If it comes between the owners closing things up and firing some people, guess who's going? You're gone. I've had a lot of jobs. I've watched a lot of people get fired. I've watched a lot of people get the short end of the stick. I've watched a lot of people work their lives away only to retire and go back into rehirement to have to get jobs again. Places are not out to serve your best interest. They are in business to make money. That's a good thing. Every business should make money, but as you can see from this, he was doing a great job. He was working hard. He had no clue what was going on under the hood. And sure enough, the place goes belly up. He loses a week's pay and some vacation. He talks about how much that bothered him because he had been working really hard. Back to the story. Seeing no reason to stick around in New York, a place that he had never actually wanted to live in the first place, Ray went back home to Chicago to see his gal Ethel. And in 1922, although still a minor, after his father told him that he must get a real job before getting married, Raymond took a job with Lilly brand paper cups as a salesman, and shortly after, him and Ethel were married. He enjoyed that job and stayed with it quite some time, saying, "I don't know what appealed to me so much about paper cups. Perhaps it was mostly because they were innovative and upbeat, but I sensed from the outset that paper cups were part of the way America was headed." So now married and supporting a family, the ambitious as ever young man picked up a second job moonlighting, in other words, working in the evenings, playing piano at nightclubs, saying this: "Paper cups were not an easy sale when I hit the streets with my Lilly cup sample case in 1922. The immigrant restaurant owners I approached with my sales pitch shook their heads and said, 'No, I have glasses. They cost me cheaper.'" In his own words, that's how he spelled it. That's how he was trying to relay it, because these were immigrants who spoke broken English, basically telling him, "Nope, I've got glasses. They don't cost me as much. Why would I buy your paper cups?" The main sales were to soda fountains. In other words, places that sold a lot of pop. He went on to say that washing glasses was a real pain in the elbow for them. If they had enough hot water to sterilize the glasses, it would create a cloud of steam coming off of their soda fountain. Paper cups got around that problem. They were more hygienic, and they eliminated breakage and losses through unreturned takeout orders. Those elements became principal points in my sales story. I was as green as grass, but I sensed that the potential for paper cups was great, and that I would do well if I could overcome the inertia and tradition of the way it was. I pounded the pavement in my territory from early morning until 5 or 5:30 in the afternoon. I would have worked longer, I suppose, but I had another job waiting on me at 6 o'clock, playing piano at a radio station, WGES, in Oak Park. The studio was in Oak Park Arms Hotel, just a couple of blocks away from the building where Ethel and I had moved into a second-floor flat. I teamed up with Harry Sosnick, the regular staff pianist, and we became known as the Piano Twins, to quote him, to the listeners who were tuned in to hear us through their earphones. We were gaining in popularity, with our pictures beginning to appear on the covers of sheet music, when Harry left to become a pianist with the well-known Zez Confrey Orchestra. He was featured in a highly successful Confrey composition. The name of this was Kitten on the Keys. Later, Harry formed his own orchestra and did well. He became a fixture on the hit parade show on radio. I was promoted to staff pianist, which, keep in mind, used to be Harry's job. I was promoted to staff pianist at WGES, and this made my double workday complete. I had to arrive at the station promptly at 6 p.m. and play for 2 hours. I was off from 8 to 10, and then I returned to work until 2 in the morning. A few hours later, 7 or 7:15, I'd be off with my sample case in pursuit of paper cup orders. The only break in this routine was on Sunday, my day off from Lilly Cup, but we had afternoon hours at the radio station then. There was no programming on Monday nights, silent nights, they were called, but on Mondays I usually played theater dates with Hugh Marshall, our announcer. Sometimes in the winter months, I would be held up by traffic, and I'd arrive at the station a couple minutes late to find Hugh Marshall stalling for time by chattering brightly into the microphone. As he glowered and shook his fist at me, I'd slip out of my coat and muffler, still wearing my galoshes, launch into some preliminary rambling on the piano, sight reading the music. Sometimes a female vocalist I'd never seen before would be there, and I'd have to accompany her songs I'd never heard, much less practiced. Often I knew nothing about the singer, her timing, or style, and I'd have to fake and flounder, but it usually came out pretty well. At news breaks, I would run to the washroom, kick off my galoshes, splash some cold water on my face, and wash my hands. That spruced me up enough to play with gusto until 8 o'clock, when I could hurry home for dinner, relax for an hour or so. The second shift, from 10 at night to 2 in the morning, was usually a lively session. I enjoyed it, but I was beginning to run out of gas by the time we went off the air. When I reached home, I would start undressing as I climbed up the stairs, and I'd already be asleep when my head hit the pillow. Fast forward a little bit to the age of 23, roughly 1925, 1926-ish, he actually took leave from selling paper cups and moved to Florida in search of real estate success. He got a job with a development in Fort Lauderdale called W.F. Morang & Son, selling real estate, and he moved his wife, their baby, and their sister-in-law down there, and they actually ended up living in a group home initially right off the bat because they didn't have the money to get their own place. But being a young man and selling mostly to older folks, he chose to grow a mustache. He was trying to kind of broaden his relatability, look a little bit older, appear a little bit more mature, and in his own words, it was a, quote, disaster, quote, and it didn't last long before he shaved it. Once the real estate dried up due to issues that drove the tourists out, and those were actually most of his business, he ended up getting back into playing piano for a living. This music job was with the Willard Robinson Orchestra in a fancy nightclub on Palm Island called The Silent Night. Ray said the music we made at The Silent Night was not so bad either. Soon I was averaging $110 a week, good money in those days. At least we were able to move out of the rooming house, the group house that I mentioned a second ago, into a 3.5-bedroom furnished apartment in a terrific new building. This nightclub was owned by a rum owner actually during the Prohibition, which was a time in America where it was illegal to sell liquor, alcohol. They couldn't sell it. It was not something that was permissible by law, and you could actually get in a lot of trouble for this. So the owner of the nightclub was someone who sold when they were not legally allowed to sell. And the operation ended up getting busted, and Raymond actually landed in jail. It was only for 3 hours, but he was talking about it. He said it was some of the worst 180 minutes of his life. He said it was absolutely terrible. But he and Ethel's lease was up March 1st of that year, and they chose to head back to Chicago due to a combination of the nightclub being busted, so his income dried up, and the missus just flat out being increasingly homesick since none of her family lived near them in the Florida area. They were all back up home in Illinois. So in 1927, Ray went back to the paper cup business and vowed to make it his, quote, only job, quote, no more moonlighting, no more side gigs. Music would be for pleasure only, and he would devote everything in him to the sales of that product, spending the remainder of his spare time with his wife and family. Not too many years later, as the Great Depression began in 1930, Raymond's father died. He said this, quote, when the market collapsed, he was crushed beneath a pile of deeds he could not sell. The land they described was worth less than he owed. This was an unbearable situation for a man of my father's principled conservatism. He died of a cerebral hemorrhage in 1930. He had worried himself to death. On his desk, the day he died, were 2 pieces of paper, his last paycheck from the telegraph company, and a garnishment notice for the entire amount of his wages. During the Depression, although he was one of Lilly Paper Cup's absolute top salesmen, he was one of their top producers, sold the most product just about of anyone else. He was actually somewhat of a sales manager at this job. His boss pulled him aside to tell him about a 10% salary cut and a 40% reduction to his car allowance. Now, this was supposed to be across the board. Every single one of their sales reps got it, but he exploded, being a proud, hot-headed man, as he put it, and quit. Now, one of the reasons for this is that he felt incredulous about the fact that he was being treated just like everyone else. He was being treated the same way that the guy who was barely producing anything, making almost no sales, just barely avoiding being fired, he was being treated the same way as that other guy. And again, here we see an example of, in the job world, it's not necessarily about how much you perform, how loyal you are, about how faithful you are, about how hard you try. It's about the fact that it's a job. It's not your own business. People don't always get paid on their performance. Even though they may get paid on their performance, you're still all viewed equally as employees. So he exploded. He was a hot-headed, proud guy, and he said right there, I quit. He ended up not telling his wife because it was the Great Depression and they were making good money. He was one of the top sales guys, but he ended up leaving the house for 3 or 4 days, going to sit in a cafe, acting like he was going to work, but really he was drinking coffee while perusing through the help wanted ads. And then his boss called the house one day to figure out where the heck he had been because his boss didn't take him seriously about the fact that he quit. So he came home. His wife explodes. Where the heck have you been? What's going on? Your boss said you're not at your job. What are you doing? Like, think about this. It's the Great Depression. Probably all their friends are going broke. They're still making good money. And she finds out her husband has not been going to work. So what's she thinking? Dude, if you keep this up, you're going to lose your job. We cannot afford that. So anyway, the boss called him back in and they worked out a special deal. He ended up staying and he kept his salary that he had before. So he didn't actually take a pay cut. And they ended up giving him back his reduction to the car allowance that they had taken away. So basically, he got a special deal, even though no one else, including his boss that he originally said I quit to, no one got a special deal, but he did because his performance was phenomenal. But in the beginning, they treated him like everyone else till they realized, hey, one of our top performers, the guy that's bringing in all this dough, is going to be leaving. So after he spent 3 or 4 days looking for a job and finding nothing, his boss called him back in, and he was happy to take the job because he realized there was nothing out there. So yay, now he's got his job back. He said, yes, I'll stay. I want to actually quit. Thank you very much. I'll stay. And one of the things he said about the job was this, was I had about 15 salesmen working for me then. And we had a fine spirit of enthusiasm percolating among us. After work, we would get together and talk shop, batting around ideas about how to sell more paper cups. That was fun. I loved seeing one of these young fellows catch hold and grow in his job. It was the most rewarding thing I'd ever experienced. I wasn't much older than any of them, and some of them were older than me, but I felt like a father to them. Now, moving on, think about this. They are in the Great Depression. People are losing their jobs, losing their houses. People are doing anything they can to make money. I mean, the stock market's crashed. People are going broke. Now, there were a lot of people that made a lot of money during the Great Depression. There were a lot of people that lost everything and never recovered. But him and his wife, Ethel, actually had decent financial stability in the Great Depression. Here's one of the things that he said. We were doing well despite the Depression. I had bought a Buick automobile, which I got secondhand for about the same price I would have had to pay for a new Model T Ford, and I shined it up and it looked like it had just rolled out of the factory. Ethel's Scotch thrift and my Bohemian prudence meshed well, and our savings grew steadily. We were able to afford a live-in maid now, a girl we hired for $4 a week plus room and board. We treated her like part of the family. Think about how crazy this is. It's the Great Depression, and he's buying a car. Okay, he's buying a car that's new to him, not like, oh, our old one died. He bought a nice car, shined it up, pretty much looked brand new, and they have a live-in maid during the Great Depression because the guy's still doing well. Moving forward now, we begin to turn a corner in his life that actually starts to lead him to what he found that ultimately led to his success of the business, the net worth, everything that I talked about in the beginning of the episode. And that was this. One of his Lily paper cup customers ran a dairy bar selling a new kind of milkshake called the 1 in a Million shake. These shakes were thicker and they were starting to sell like crazy, and the creator of the shake was running into an issue of not being able to pump them out fast enough for customers. And the fact that they were making them in metal cups, if you've ever gone to a small dairy bar and you see them making the shake in these metal cups that they then have to rinse out, put in the sink, get washed to make the next one, this was actually becoming an issue because, number one, there was loss of product in the shake because they weren't able to get everything out into the paper cup to give to the customer. And then also now I have to spend all the time washing these cups and buying more cups so I don't have to wash them as often. And doing this consistently and constantly was actually very cumbersome, and it was a time-sucking chore. So Ray, still selling paper cups, came up with the idea. He said they should use a metal sleeve inserted into a Lily Tulip brand cup, which is what he was selling, to stop the washing chore and the waste that came from making the shake in the metal cups, then pouring them into the paper cups for the customers. His customer, the guy that owned this dairy bar, was named Earl Prince, and he was the creator of this 1 in a Million milkshake. He loved the idea so much he began using it immediately, and he started selling so many 1 in a Million shakes that he started burning out their mixer machines, and this forced him to create a new product. Necessity is the mother of invention. He was forced to create a product that would not actually just burn out from mixing this high volume of shakes all day long, and this led Earl Prince to create the multi-mixer. I'll tell you more about that in part 2.